Welcome everyone, it's me again, DJ. For those who don't know me, I'm the programmer of an indie game called Unity3D, which is currently in development for Steam. In this video I will show you how to use the new input system of Unity and get started with it. We recently also switched to it for Unity3D. If you are interested to see more of our game, feel free to follow us on our social media accounts. The links are in the description. Of course, there is a lot more to the new input system than we are going to cover up in this video, but I hope this will give you a good insight how to use it for your game. I have also set up a public repository for this code, so if you want the project files, there will be a link to the GitHub repository in the description. I also added a blog post where I have a step-by-step guide for this tutorial, so if you're more of a reading person, check the link to the blog post in the description. So let's jump right into the setup. First of all, you will need to download the package if it is not installed yet. If it is not in your project settings, you probably don't have the package installed yet. Don't get confused by the one input manager entry in the project settings. That one is the old system. To install the package, open up the package manager by clicking Windows, Package Manager. Now you will see a list of installed packages. Chances are that you won't see it here because there is a filter at the top. Simply click it and select Packages All. Now you can either search for it by using the text field at the top right, or just look through the list. It is called Input System. When you're done installing, restart Unity. Let it do some of its magic in the background. And when it is done, you can find it in the project settings under Input System Package. Click here on Create Setting Asset. Before we jump into the code, let's take a look at what we are about to code. Here you can see the different roles of the assets we are about to create. The input action asset is going to contain the basic definition of our inputs and bundle them together in action maps. You can set up an input action asset with different action maps for different use cases. For instance, player gameplay controls might be different than UI controls. You can also define multiple different inputs for an action. For instance, the player could get moved by using the left analog stick on a controller or with the arrow keys on the keyboard. Both will trigger the same events later. The input actions C# file right next to it in the image is going to get generated by Unity automatically. It simply makes the input action asset available through code. We will add an input handler script that reads those values and prepares easier digestible and further processed variables and events we want for our player. With this said, let's set up our input action asset first. Simply right click and select Create Input Action and name it Player Controls. Before opening it, click on it once so that it shows up in the inspector. Tick the Generate C# class checkbox. Now open it up and define an input action map. We will call this one Player. You could later make more for UI or menus and switch between them. For now we will stick with the player. We want a move and an attack action for our player. The move action should be a vector2 type, because we want the directional values. You won't find the inputs you need if you work with the default binding that was created with the action. So remove the default binding and click on the plus sign right next to the move action and select add 2D vector composite. Now set up the keys you want for the directions. I used the arrow keys. Attack is easier to set up because it is just a button. I used the default binding and set it to the Z key. That's it. Don't forget to save the asset by clicking Save Asset at the top of that window. It won't save automatically if you don't tick the autosave checkbox. There should be two files now. The input asset you just created and the generated C# class that is also named Player Controls. Now right click and create a new script. This will be our input handler. Call it Player Input Handler. Here we first create all the member variables we want to make available to our player script. Let's assume we want to have a variable for attack pressed and attack pressing. Attack pressed will only be true in that one frame the action has been performed. And attack pressing will stay true until the player cancels the input. So basically on button down and on button from the old input system. We also want to have a public move vector that reads the move values each frame and an onMove event that fires every time the player is trying to move. We can bind it in our player script later and get the values read from it and do something, only if the move value is not 0. We also need an instance of the generated player controls. We make this one private for now, since we won't need it outside of the script. Before we can read the inputs, we must enable them in onEnable, otherwise nothing will work. And to avoid memory leaks, run disable in onDisable. So this is how it should look like. You can now access the events through the player controls instant and bind functions to them. So whenever the player performs the attack action, run my onAttackPerformed function and pass it the context variable that the event fires. So write an onAttackPerformed function that takes in input action callback context. If that type is not available to you, simply add using Unity Engine input system at the top. Inside the onAttackPerformed action, we want to set our attack variables to true, because the action has been performed now. Since performed is only fired when the action has been performed, the variables will stay true. That's why we need to set them to false again. Attack pressed needs to be set to false at the end of that frame. So I will set it to false in late update. Attack pressing, however, needs to be set to false if the player cancels the action. There is a cancelled event for this. So write an onAttackCancelled function and bind it to the cancelled event, just like we did it with performed. In there you can set them to false again. That's it for attack. Let's write the move logic now. So we want to have the move vector to be up to date even when it has not been performed. That's why we need to store the value on update. you can access it through the player controls instance and read the value with the read value function. Another thing I did here is firing the onMove event whenever the player performs the action, but that one is not exactly how I wanted onMove to behave. You will see in a second why and how to fix it. I guess we are done now with our handler. We can attach that script to our player and have it available to our game objects by using getComponent. From here on, it is simply just asking for values, like do an attack when the player pressed attack, or charge your super bullet when the player is holding down attack. Or even move the player when the move magnitude has any length to it. Here you can see how my onMove code is not exactly how I wanted it to behave. I wanted to move the game object onMove by the vector value. For this I bind a function to it and translate the position by that vector. The problem is that I fired the onMove whenever the action got performed. That's exactly one time. What I actually wanted to do was to fire the action whenever the move vector has any directional value. This is much better now. That's it for today's tutorial. As mentioned before, we use this new input system in our game Evenor, and it works right out of the box with multiple input devices, without much hassle. Thanks to it, we can now use Xbox and PlayStation controllers on top of keyboard inputs on different platforms easily. So if you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like button, and if you want to see more from us, consider subscribing. And if you want to see more of Evenor, head over to our Twitter account and follow us. The links are in the description. With this said, have a nice day and see you next time.